the core, the scriptural core of it. I mean, there's all of the experience that I think you and everybody that has practiced some already knows the answer to how this is rebelling against some of our tendencies that create suffering for ourselves. But the scriptural core of what the Buddha was saying was just after his enlightenment, he said, he used the term patiso tagami in the Pali that says this goes against the stream. And it was when he had had his awakening, his enlightenment, but he was a little bit hesitant to go teach. And he said, this world that is filled with greed, that is filled with hatred, that is filled with delusion, how are people going to understand this Dharma that is subtle, that is sublime, that is hard to see even by the wise? You have to go against the stream, against greed, against hatred, against delusion. And then all through the teachings, he's talking about how craving for pleasure we're born with it. It's innate in us. And that happiness, the end of suffering, comes from from rebelling against this craving and clinging tendency that we're born into. And that, of course, developing compassion also is this radical, it's not just this sort of easy thing to do, that we have to go against our survival instinct, which is to hate pain and to try to push pain away. To develop compassion, to turn pain, to learn to care about pain, we're rebelling against our survival instinct. Now, from the inside, and then, of course, on the outside, everything that we see in the world is likewise a manifestation. All of the problems we see in the world, not the beauty and the goodness that we also see in the world, but the problems that we see in the world are manifestations of the same internal greed and hatred and delusion that human beings are born with. And so the revolutionary aspect is that as we go against greed within ourselves by practicing non-attachment, by practicing generosity, by becoming a loving force in the world, we also create some sort of external positive social change. Hopefully we get involved in some sort of engagement, some sort of activism. From the internal rebellion comes the external. Likewise with hatred, as we develop more compassion and have more compassion for one's own pain, then we become more compassionately engaged in all of our relationships and hopefully in some sort of active way to create a positive change. And whether that's environmental activism or human social services or animal rights, or it's just some way that we dedicate our life, as you said, like a bodhisattva, for the benefit of all beings. And that this is something that has to come from going against the stream, from going against greed and against hatred and against delusion. I believe that the practice, the meditative awakening practice, the Eightfold Path, is mostly pointing towards an internal rebellion. But then the outcome of that is activism often, or some sort of social engagement, which is then the expression and is rebelling against the forces in this world of greed and hatred and ignorance and confusion. So that it's the engaged activity of awakening. And, in order to end greed, we have to be generous. So activism is also an act of generosity that's also ending one's own greed. So it's both internal, it's from the inside out, but also sometimes, I know from one of my experiences was, in order to have some internal forgiveness, it was a lot of the external actions that I did that led to making amends to people, apologizing, repaying, becoming free from debt. The karmic purification wasn't just on the meditation cushion, it was also in action. I think that everything that we see in society, in the world, comes from the individual. It is a whole bunch of individuals that create politics, that create war, that create oppression, that create all forms of inequality and all forms of all of the problems in this world are created by people. I think that the punks were onto something. As most counterculture, subculture groups are, they're onto something. And in my experience, the punks were especially dissatisfied. Right, there was a political critique, a social critique of the injustice, of the suffering, of the confusion in this world, and their solution was to critique it, and often, unfortunately, to become self-destructive in response to the destruction in the world. When I came to the Dharma, so I have that core, when I heard punk rock at 10 years old, these people were dissatisfied the way that I felt dissatisfied. But when I came to the Dharma at 17 years old, very young, and started practicing, I was like, oh, here's actually a solution. And the Buddha gets it. He's talking about suffering. He's pointing towards the truth of reality, but he's also pointing towards the causes and the solution. And that the solution obviously isn't self-destructive, anarchist rebellion. It's engaged, loving, wise activity.